October 26, 1942. Guadalcanal, a rain-soaked ridge south of Henderson Field. Japanese infantry are pouring from the jungle in waves while Marine machine gun positions disappear one by one beneath mortar fire and rifle bursts. Ammunition bearers collapse beside their belts of .30 caliber rounds. Loaders fall silent. Men vanish into mud and darkness. Then one sergeant crawls behind the nearest gun alone. Steam hisses from the water jacket. The jungle erupts around him. And because he understands exactly what happens if this weapon stops firing, he keeps firing. By October 1942, Guadalcanal has become the most contested piece of ground in the Pacific. Not because of its size, not because of its beauty, because of one strip of packed coral and dirt carved beside the jungle and named Henderson Field. That airfield becomes the center of gravity for the entire South Pacific campaign. Without it, American aircraft cannot reach the Japanese shipping lanes threading through the Solomon Islands. Without those aircraft, the supply corridor between the United States and Australia begins to choke shut. Whoever controls Henderson Field controls the future of the Pacific. And both sides understand that perfectly. The Marines seized the airfield in August during the opening stages of the Guadalcanal campaign. The landing itself almost feels deceptively easy. On August 7th, some 6,000 men from the 1st Marine Division storm ashore on Guadalcanal and nearby Florida Island. Japanese defenders near the airfield are surprised completely. Naval gunfire and Allied aircraft support the assault, while transports unload men and equipment onto black volcanic beaches beneath humid tropical skies. Within 36 hours, the Marines secure the unfinished Japanese airstrip. For a brief moment, it feels like momentum, victory, progress. Then reality arrives. Taking Henderson Field proves much easier than holding it. Within days, Japanese naval forces strike back violently. Warships hammer Allied vessels offshore. Aircraft raid the beaches constantly. American and Australian transports are driven away before unloading fully, leaving the Marines stranded with limited supplies and no guarantee reinforcements can return safely. The men on the island begin calling the situation Operation Shoestring. The name is not a joke. Everything becomes scarce. Food, medicine, ammunition, sleep. The siege settles over Guadalcanal slowly and relentlessly. Malaria tears through the ranks. Men wake shivering with fever before standing watch again hours later because there are not enough healthy Marines to replace them. Mosquitoes drift through every foxhole. Rain floods trenches nightly. Tropical heat rots clothing, equipment, and skin alike. Rations shrink to 2 meals a day, sometimes less. The jungle itself feels hostile, thick, wet, and alive with insects carrying disease as efficiently as mortar fragments. Every night, the Marines listen for Japanese bombers. Every day, they dig deeper around Henderson Field and wait for the next assault. And the assaults keep coming. The Japanese launch repeated efforts to retake the airfield. The Battle of the Tenaru, Edson's Bloody Ridge, the Battle of Henderson Field. Each attack crashes against the Marine perimeter with horrifying losses on both sides. Each time the Marines hold. Each time the cost becomes harder to sustain. But the Japanese refuse to stop. Between October 1st and October 17th, Japanese convoys deliver roughly 15,000 additional troops onto Guadalcanal, including major elements of the 2nd Infantry Division and the 38th Infantry Division alongside artillery, ammunition, tanks, and supplies. These nighttime destroyer runs become known to the Marines as the Tokyo Express. Fast warships race down the channel after dark, unload men and material beneath jungle cover, then escape before American aircraft from Henderson Field can intercept them after sunrise. Every Marine on the perimeter watches the buildup happen, counts explosions, counts muzzle flashes, counts the nights remaining before the next major attack. Then comes October 13th, the night the Marines simply call the night. At 1:33 in the morning, the Japanese battleships Japanese Battleship Congo and Japanese Battleship Haruna reach firing position offshore. Escorted by cruisers and destroyers, they open fire on Henderson Field. Over the next 83 minutes, nearly 1,000 14-inch shells crash into the Marine perimeter. The bombardment becomes apocalyptic. Runways crater instantly. Fuel dumps erupt into towering fireballs. Aircraft explode on the ground before pilots can reach them. Men vanish beneath collapsing sandbag bunkers. The shelling destroys most available aviation fuel, cripples the airfield, wipes out nearly half the aircraft stationed there, and kills dozens of Marines outright. Survivors later refer to it simply as the night because no other description feels large enough. By mid-October, the pattern becomes obvious to everyone. The Japanese are preparing something massive. The only question is when. General Harakichi Hyakutake himself arrives on Guadalcanal to oversee the offensive personally. The commanding officer of the Japanese 17th Army now stands on the island directing the largest coordinated ground assault of the campaign. And the target remains unchanged. Henderson Field, that flat strip of coral and mud capable of deciding control of the Pacific. Somewhere along the southern edge of the Marine perimeter, a platoon sergeant from western Pennsylvania checks his machine guns beneath pouring rain while Japanese artillery shakes the jungle around him. His name is Mitchell Paige, and whether Henderson Field survives the next 48 hours may depend entirely on whether his guns continue firing. The weapon anchoring the Marine defensive line is not glamorous, not modern, not lightweight. It is the M1917 Browning machine gun, a water-cooled, belt-fed heavy machine gun first carried into combat during World War I. And on Guadalcanal, it becomes the single most important weapon in the perimeter. The gun is enormous by infantry standards. The receiver alone weighs over 40 pounds. Add the tripod, add the water-filled cooling jacket, add ammunition belts and spare equipment. The full system weighs well over 100 pounds. Moving it requires multiple men. Deploying it takes time. Once positioned, it does not relocate easily. But the Browning can do something almost no other infantry weapon can accomplish reliably. It can fire continuously. Most machine guns overheat quickly under sustained fire. The Browning's water jacket changes the equation entirely. As long as ammunition continues feeding and water remains inside the cooling system, the gun can maintain devastating sustained fire for extraordinary lengths of time. 450 to 600 rounds per minute. Not in short bursts. Continuously. In defensive combat, that capability becomes physics itself. A wall of bullets dense enough to stop human movement. In the Pacific jungle, Japanese tactics often rely on mass infantry assaults launched at night through close terrain where visibility collapses to almost nothing. Against that kind of attack, the Browning becomes more than a weapon. It becomes the final mechanical barrier between an intact perimeter and total collapse. But the gun cannot operate alone. The Browning is a crew-served system, a gunner behind the spade grips, an assistant gunner feeding ammunition belts and clearing jams, ammunition bearers hauling heavy boxes of linked rounds through mud and shell fire, someone coordinating sectors of fire and monitoring barrel temperature. When the system functions properly, one machine gun section can anchor an entire defensive line. When the crew starts dying, the system breaks apart quickly. Mitchell Paige understands that perfectly. He has spent 6 years in the Marine Corps before Guadalcanal, long enough to become part of what younger Marines call the old breed. He enlisted at 18, served in China, Cuba, and the Philippines before the war, learned discipline before combat ever arrived. Inside his platoon, every Marine is required to field strip the Browning, the M1903 Springfield, and the .45 pistol blindfolded. Take it apart. Reassemble it. Every man. That training is not about perfection. It is about survival. Because on a dark ridge during a Japanese assault, any man may need to step behind any weapon instantly. The question is never whether someone will fall. The question is whether someone else is ready. The 7th Marines arrive on Guadalcanal in September 1942 after deployment in Samoa. By then the campaign already feels desperate. The Marines who have held the perimeter since August look hollowed out from disease, bombardment, and exhaustion. Henderson Field remains operational, but the line surrounding it is stretched dangerously thin. The 7th Marines inherit part of the southern sector. Ridges, ravines, dense jungle, visibility measured in yards instead of hundreds of yards. At night, visibility disappears entirely. You cannot see 10 feet into the tree line without a flare, and flares only reveal where to shoot. This is where the next Japanese offensive will fall. The Marines know it. Japanese patrols probe deeper each night. Tokyo Express destroyers continue unloading reinforcements. Bombardments intensify. Every man along the perimeter can feel pressure building invisibly inside the jungle. The conditions alone are enough to break weaker armies. Heat thick enough to suffocate. Rain falling in sheets instead of showers. Foxholes collapsing into mud pits. Mosquitoes carrying malaria into already exhausted bodies. Food reduced to captured Japanese rice and leftover sea rations. Men lose weight constantly, lose strength, lose sleep, yet still stand watch, still dig, still prepare. Then, during the third week of October, the buildup reaches its breaking point. Japanese attacks strike repeatedly across the perimeter. Tanks assault Marine positions near the Matanikaw River. Artillery hammers defensive lines. Infantry infiltrators move through jungle corridors searching for weak points. The assaults fail, but they are not the main effort. The real attack is still forming south of Henderson Field, and it is aimed directly at the ridge where Mitchell Paige's machine guns wait. On the evening of October 25, 1942, Platoon Sergeant Mitchell Paige crawls along the muddy ridge line, making final preparations while rain pours through the jungle around him. His 33 Marines position 4 Browning machine guns facing a jungle-choked ravine where Japanese forces are massing for attack. Paige strings crude trip wires across the approaches using ration cans and empty shell casings designed to rattle if disturbed. Primitive. Simple. Effective. The kind of improvisation only experience teaches. Japanese artillery shells explode across the ridge while he works. Still he keeps crawling, keeps checking the guns, keeps tightening the wire. Because somewhere beyond the darkness, thousands of Japanese soldiers are already moving toward the Marine line. And when they arrive, the Brownings must not fail. Mitchell Paige did not become a Marine hero overnight. Long before Guadalcanal, he had already spent years learning how military systems fail under pressure, and how discipline keeps them functioning anyway. He served aboard warships, guarded American property in Shanghai during the Sino-Japanese conflict, trained recruits at bases across the Atlantic coast. He learned his trade not inside classrooms, but through deployments, routine hardship, and the kind of unglamorous assignments that turn young enlistees into professionals. Growing up during the Great Depression shaped him deeply. Paige was born to Serbian immigrant parents near Charleroi, a steel town world filled with coal smoke, hard labor, and families measuring prosperity by whether the pantry held enough food for winter. Money was never guaranteed. Opportunity was never guaranteed. After graduating high school in 1936, Paige's mother packed him a lunch and watched him leave home on foot for the nearest Marine Corps recruiting station nearly 200 miles away. The Marines offered structure, purpose, a paycheck. Paige accepted all three and committed himself completely. Now, 6 years later, he stands on a ridge in the Solomon Islands with 33 Marines and 4 heavy machine guns while thousands of Japanese soldiers gather in the jungle below. His section occupies a saddle-shaped hill between companies F and G of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. The position is critical. It anchors the scene between 2 rifle companies where the terrain naturally funnels attackers uphill through a narrow ravine toward the Marine perimeter. If the Japanese push directly through that gap, Paige's guns will absorb the first impact, and likely the last. Rain continues falling steadily through the night. Japanese artillery keeps striking the ridge. Somewhere beyond the darkness, roughly 2,000 Japanese soldiers prepare for assault. Every Marine along the line understands what is coming. The final order passed to Paige's platoon is brutally simple. Hold. No fallback position. No reserve force waiting behind them. Just hold. The attack begins during the early morning hours of October 26th. It does not begin with one sound. It begins with all sound at once. Artillery, mortars, machine guns. Then the noise every Marine on Guadalcanal has learned to fear most. The roar of a mass infantry assault moving through darkness. Japanese troops surge upward through the ravine in waves. The 4M 1917 Browning machine guns open fire immediately. The sound is enormous. 4 water-cooled Brownings firing together do not resemble separate weapons anymore. Their cyclic rates merge into one continuous mechanical roar, tearing through the jungle like ripping canvas. The first Japanese wave collapses almost instantly. Bodies pile along the base of the slope. Tracer rounds slash bright orange lines through rain and darkness, while the machine guns carve open entire sections of advancing infantry. For a moment, the line holds. Then another wave appears. Japanese assault doctrine in 1942 is built around momentum, not probing attacks, overwhelming attacks. If the first wave dies, the second keeps moving. If the second stalls, the third follows directly behind it. Mass itself becomes the weapon, and the Japanese do not stop. Company F absorbs the heaviest pressure first. Fighting degenerates rapidly into close-range chaos. Bayonets, grenades, rifle butts swung like clubs. Men fighting shapes they can barely identify through darkness and rain. The jungle compresses combat down to arm's length. Friend and enemy become distinguishable only after someone screams or falls. Paige moves constantly between gun positions, directing fire, shifting targets, trying to keep every weapon aimed toward the densest concentration of attackers. Ammunition bearers struggle uphill, carrying heavy boxes of belted .30 caliber rounds through mud and exploding mortar fire. Loaders feed ammunition with shaking hands slick from sweat and rain. The noise becomes almost incomprehensible. Rifles cracking, Brownings hammering, grenades detonating, men shouting, men dying. Then the casualties begin. Fast, savage. A gunner collapses over his weapon. An ammunition bearer falls beside a belt of rounds and stops moving. A loader spins away from his position with blood pouring through his uniform. Another Marine disappears beneath mortar fragments. Paige orders the remaining guns to continue firing no matter what. The first assault wave breaks apart beneath the machine gun fire, but the Japanese keep coming, and the attrition accelerates. Every casualty now matters exponentially. The Browning is not designed for one man. Without a loader, the ammunition belt jams or slips. Without a gunner, the weapon loses its beaten zone. Without ammunition bearers, the guns eventually run dry. The system starts collapsing piece by piece. And a silent machine gun inside a defensive line is not merely a problem. It is an opening. There is a moment in every defensive battle where the mathematics change completely. Not strategic mathematics. Immediate mathematics. How many men remain capable of keeping this weapon operational right now? On that ridge south of Henderson Field, the answer becomes terrifying. 0. The Japanese break directly into the line in front of Paige's position. Every Marine inside the machine gun section is now dead, wounded, or physically unable to continue fighting. 33 men. Gone. Some killed outright. Others bleeding in the mud beside disabled weapons. The Brownings begin falling silent one by one. And the silence itself becomes dangerous. Because the machine gun section is not supporting the defensive line. It is the line. When the Brownings stop firing, the Japanese finally gain exactly what they need. A gap. A seam. A place where no bullets are falling. A place where formations can pour through and split the Marine perimeter open. Behind that ridge lies Henderson Field itself. And behind Henderson Field lies the entire American position on Guadalcanal. The rifle companies on Paige's flanks begin pulling back under pressure. Not from cowardice. From survival. The Japanese assault has become too heavy to hold conventionally. Suddenly, the machine gun section is isolated on the ridge with almost no support remaining. From any rational military perspective, the position is finished. The correct tactical decision should be withdrawal. Fall back. Reform. Preserve survivors. But Paige looks behind him and understands exactly what remains there. Nothing except Henderson Field. Nothing except mud, darkness, and the airstrip holding the Pacific campaign together. So he stays. What he does next is not complicated. It is not elegant. It is simply refusal. Paige crawls behind the nearest Browning machine gun, still capable of firing, and operates it himself. One man. A weapon designed for a crew. Direct enemy fire pouring across the ridge. Steam hissing from the water jacket. Japanese soldiers already moving through the breach. And still he starts firing again. The effect is immediate. The advancing Japanese troops suddenly encounter machine gun fire where they expected silence. Bodies begin dropping at the breakthrough point again. Not enough to stop the assault entirely, but enough to disrupt it. Enough to slow it. Enough to force attackers to hesitate inside the gap instead of flooding through cleanly. And hesitation inside combat matters enormously. Paige fires until the ammunition belt empties, then reloads it himself. The Browning bucks violently with every burst while steam rises from the overheated cooling jacket into the rain-soaked darkness. The water inside the jacket is literally boiling from sustained fire. His hands burn against the metal. Still he keeps loading. keeps firing. Then enemy rounds destroy the gun, so Paige moves to another one. The second Browning is partly damaged but operational. He clears the feed tray, loads another belt, fires again. Japanese infantry advancing through the breach collapse beneath another beaten zone of .30 caliber fire. The ridge line erupts continuously with tracer flashes and steam, while Paige moves between positions trying to create the illusion that multiple Marines still operate the guns. In reality, the entire defense now rests on one man sprinting through darkness between shattered machine gun nests. A Japanese soldier suddenly appears beside one of the guns and thrusts a bayonet toward Paige's face. Paige throws up his left hand instinctively. The blade slices deeply through his fingers, nearly severing them. Blood spills across the Browning receiver. Without hesitation, Paige draws his K-bar knife and drives it into the attacker's neck. The soldier collapses. Paige turns immediately back to the machine gun and continues firing. The battlefield now demands silence. That is what mass assault tactics are trying to achieve. Silence from the guns. Silence from the ridge. Silence from the point of resistance. Paige answers with noise instead. Continuous ripping belt-fed noise that tells every Japanese soldier in the ravine below that the position is still alive, still defended, still killing. By running between the remaining operational Brownings, Paige creates the illusion that an intact machine gun platoon still holds the ridge. Different firing angles, different positions, different bursts. One man imitating an entire defensive section through movement and willpower alone. And critically, the Japanese never receive the clear silence they need to exploit the breakthrough properly. This matters militarily for one simple reason. Machine guns create beaten zones, areas where bullet density becomes so intense that organized movement through them becomes nearly impossible. As long as Paige keeps firing, the Japanese cannot mass effectively inside the breach. They can push forward individually, in small groups, at horrific cost, but they cannot flood through as a coordinated force. And coordinated force is exactly what the assault requires. The minutes stretch endlessly. Paige loses track of time completely. The physical demands alone become almost incomprehensible. The Browning recoils violently. The ammunition belts weigh heavily even with two healthy hands. Paige now has one hand deeply lacerated and bleeding continuously. Mortars continue striking the ridge. Grenades detonate nearby. Dead Marines lie beside the guns. Still the Brownings keep firing. Eventually, reinforcements finally begin reaching the ridge. Not elite reserves. Not organized counterattack forces. Whoever can carry a rifle. Clerks. Cooks. Rear echelon Marines scrape together from wherever officers can find breathing men capable of moving toward the sound of battle. Alongside Marines from Company G, they launch a desperate counterattack against the exhausted Japanese troops now stalled beneath Paige's machine gun fire. And slowly, the Japanese begin falling back into the jungle. The ridge survives. The line does not collapse, and Henderson Field remains in American hands. The reinforcements reached the ridge expecting to find silence. Instead, they found Mitchell Paige still behind a machine gun, still firing. Spent brass covered the mud around him in glittering piles. Dead Marines and Japanese soldiers lay scattered across the slope and inside the ravine below. Steam rose from the Browning's overheated water jacket while the smell of cordite, blood, wet earth, and burned metal mixed beneath the tropical rain. The rain itself never stopped. It simply kept falling across the battlefield with complete indifference. Paige did not collapse when help arrived, did not hand off the weapon, did not crawl toward safety. What happened next is what separated his stand from countless other desperate defensive actions throughout military history. Because once reinforcements reached the ridge, Paige attacked. He organized the arriving Marines into a skirmish line almost immediately. No speeches, no dramatic pause, just movement, orders, direction, the same calm mechanical focus he had shown all night behind the guns. Then he unclamped AM 1917 Browning machine gun from its tripod, slung ammunition belts across his shoulders, and lifted the massive weapon into his arms. The Browning weighed more than 40 pounds without its tripod. The water jacket still contained boiling liquid. The barrel radiated enough heat to burn skin through fabric. Paige carried it anyway. Then he led the counterattack downhill directly into the Japanese position. The The sight must have looked almost unreal inside the darkness and rain. A bleeding Marine platoon sergeant carrying a steaming machine gun through the jungle while firing from the hip. Tracers ripping through the trees ahead of him while Marines fixed bayonets and charged behind. The Japanese troops expected to overrun a broken position. Instead, the position was coming toward them. The counter-assault carried a kind of violence the attackers had not anticipated. Japanese soldiers, already disoriented by the prolonged machine gun fire, suddenly faced Marines advancing directly into the ravine where the breakthrough should have succeeded. The psychological effect mattered enormously. Momentum in assault warfare is fragile. The Japanese attack depended on exploiting weakness and movement through the breach before the Marines could stabilize. Instead, they encountered resistance growing more aggressive the longer the fight continued. The Japanese began falling back, not retreating cleanly, falling back in fragments, some trying to regroup inside the jungle, others abandoning the ridge entirely. The bayonet charge pushed them down the slope and back into the ravine beneath concentrated rifle and machine gun fire. The penetration closed, the line held, and Henderson Field remained in American hands. By sunrise, 98 Japanese soldiers lay dead on the ridge itself. Roughly 200 more filled the ravine below. The cost to Paige's section was catastrophic. Every one of the 33 Marines who started the night beside those 4 machine guns had been killed or wounded. The platoon no longer existed as a functioning combat unit, but the airfield behind them still existed. And in October 1942, that distinction changed the Pacific War. Across Guadalcanal, the pattern repeated itself. Japanese General Harakichi Hyakutake launched massive assaults against multiple sectors of the Marine perimeter over 3 days, attempting to overwhelm the defenders through sheer force. Again and again, the attacks crashed against the line. Again and again, the Marines held. Every breakthrough met counterattack. Every penetration contested. The October offensive, the largest Japanese ground assault of the Guadalcanal campaign, failed completely. It became the last major Japanese ground offensive on the island. That fact mattered strategically far beyond the ridge Paige defended. Because with Henderson Field secure, American aircraft continued operating across the Solomon Islands chain. Japanese supply convoys remained vulnerable to interception. Reinforcement efforts became increasingly dangerous and unsustainable. The Tokyo Express, the nighttime destroyer runs that once moved almost freely through the islands, slowly became a death route under constant American air attack. The balance in the Pacific began shifting permanently. The campaign did not end immediately. In November 1942, the Japanese attempted one final major reinforcement effort during the catastrophic naval battle of Guadalcanal. Warships clashed violently offshore. Aircraft attacked continuously. Entire fleets burned across the sea. But the reinforcement effort failed. And by February 1943, Japan evacuated its surviving forces from Guadalcanal entirely. The island remained Allied territory for the rest of the war. Historians later described Guadalcanal and the Battle of Midway as the turning points of the Pacific conflict. That is true, but turning points are rarely clean moments. They are accumulations. Thousands of individual actions compounding slowly into strategic reality. And on October 26th, one of those actions occurred on a muddy ridge south of Henderson Field where the battle came dangerously close to collapse. Mitchell Paige's stand did not win Guadalcanal by itself. No single man could. But in the narrow sector where the line nearly broke completely, the outcome depended on whether several Browning machine guns continued firing long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And one man made sure they did. The Marine Corps recognized that quickly. While still on Guadalcanal, Paige received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant in December 1942. The promotion recognized more than simple bravery. It recognized leadership under total collapse. The ability to function when command structures, support systems, and normal tactical logic all disintegrated simultaneously. In May 1943, in Melbourne, Australia, Marine Commandant Alexander Vandegrift presented Mitchell Paige with the Medal of Honor. The citation described fearless determination, machine gun fire, and the bayonet charge that sealed the breach. But medals often simplify combat. They compress chaos into language neat enough to fit inside official paperwork. The reality on the ridge was uglier, louder, more exhausting, more human. There is a temptation when telling stories like this to transform the central figure into something superhuman. A myth, a warrior beyond ordinary men. That interpretation misses the point entirely. Mitchell Paige was not superhuman. He was a Marine from a Pennsylvania steel town who spent 6 years mastering his weapons, training his men, and internalizing a simple principle drilled into him from boot camp onward. The mission does not end because conditions become impossible. It ends when the mission is complete, or the man is dead. On October 26th, neither condition had been met. So Paige kept going. The military logic behind his actions remained brutally simple. Do not let the guns fall silent. Do not let the enemy exploit the breach. Make every yard too expensive to take. And when reinforcements arrive, attack. No grand strategy. No complex maneuver. Just relentless refusal. That is why the story endures. Not because it describes brilliance, because it describes duration. A man continuing to function after every rational calculation says he should stop. The human body failing, the line failing, the position collapsing, and still the machine gun firing through rain and darkness because someone refuses to leave it. Paige later became the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Guadalcanal campaign. In his later years, he worked with the FBI helping identify counterfeit medals of honor and exposing fraudulent claims surrounding them. He protected the integrity of the award with the same stubbornness he once used protecting the ridge itself. Relentless, unyielding, precise, and even decades later, he never claimed the stand as his alone. When General Van de Grift presented him the medal, Paige responded simply that it belonged to the 33 Marines in his platoon. The men who loaded the ammunition belts, carried the water, fed the guns, died beside the guns, because beneath all the mythology, that remained the truth. The stand was not one man's. 33 Marines held that ridge. They just did not all survive it. Paige died in 2003 at the age of 85. Long after Guadalcanal, long after the Pacific War ended, long after the jungle reclaimed the battlefields around Henderson Field. But the image remains frozen permanently in military history. A lone Marine moving from machine gun to machine gun through rain and darkness while an entire offensive crashes against the line around him. The gun did not stop firing. The ridge did not fall. And Henderson Field, the strip of coral and mud holding the future of the Pacific campaign together, remained in American hands. Not because conditions favored the defenders, not because the numbers made sense, but because one exhausted platoon sergeant refused to let the darkness win.